Welcome everyone. I am Jennifer Kimlingen, LCSW, and today I'm going to be discussing the child's grief journey. To share a little bit about me, I have been working in the field for over 10 years and graduated from Adelphi University with my master's in social work in 2014. I hold additional certifications as a clinical trauma professional and currently work with individuals across the lifespan in private practice. My previous work experience includes working with children as young as 4, teens, and adults in various hospice settings. I have been provided a wealth of experience as a bereavement specialist and hold a special place in my heart for grieving children, as I believe that no child should grieve alone. I currently reside in Carlisle, Pennsylvania with my spouse and 2 children. I enjoy amateur candle making, yoga, and videos of baby animals when I need to decompress. I am a lifelong learner and hopeful to begin my social work doctorate studies next year. Let's begin with our learning today. Let's review the learning objectives for today. First, participants will evaluate their own comfort level with grief, death, and dying, and their prior experiences. It is important for clinicians to gain awareness of how their prior experiences, attitudes, and family of origin culture practices around grief can impact the therapeutic relationship. Participants will gain a basic understanding of how children and adolescents' developmental stages influence experiences of grief. Participants will learn how to best support grieving children, which we find is through encouraging expression with creative play and therapeutic activities, as well as how to support their caregivers. Participants will become aware of red flags in the grieving journey for children and when to seek intensive mental health supports. Let's discuss current impacts and important statistics around grieving children. An estimated 6.4 million children in the United States will experience the death of a parent or a sibling by age 18. This equates to approximately 1 in 11 children. 7.8%, or 5.5 million children, will experience the death of a parent, and 1.3%, or 963,000, will experience the death of a sibling. Those numbers are estimated to double if we consider extended family, such as grandparents, aunts and uncles, etc. Experiencing childhood bereavement can result in decreased academic performance, mental health and behavioral health concerns, and even early mortality. Specifically, bereavement was associated with increased incidence of depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and functional impairment. Bereaved children are twice as likely to experience significant challenges at home, and 1 in 4 bereaved youth are estimated to die by suicide. Bereaved youth are 175% more likely to develop a substance use disorder in adulthood. So as we can see, the impacts are significant and potentially long-lasting. In past trainings, this would be the part of the day where in person we would break off into small groups and or discuss one-on-one individual reflections on our own experiences with death and dying. We would explore questions like, what were the messages, rules, and norms around death in your own home as a child? Did you participate in family or cultural rituals? Or was death a taboo subject? Or maybe it was discussed with care. The importance in these reflections is to become aware of your own reactions to death, dying, and loss. It is necessary to understand our own potential bias, attitudes, and capacity for grief before we can truly witness someone else's pain without judgment or enmeshment. Children, especially, pick up on this immediately. They are extremely receptive, extremely aware of body language, and they will know if you are uncomfortable discussing these subjects. As you can imagine, this will impact the effectiveness of the work with grieving children. And so I would encourage you to take time individually, in a journal, perhaps with your own therapist, to sit and explore these questions. Let's spend some more time discussing why it is so important for therapists to be very aware of their own reactions around death and dying, grief and loss, when working with children. The reason it matters most is first and foremost countertransference. We know this to be a noun and to be the therapist's unconscious and often conscious reactions to the patient and to the patient's transference. These thoughts and feelings are based on the therapist's own psychological needs and their conflicts, and may be unexpressed or revealed through conscious responses to patient behavior. So I'm sure at some point or another we have all been in a situation where somebody was telling a story of loss or grief, and someone nearby, whether related, unrelated, or appropriate at the time, burst into tears. And while emotional responses are always understandable, a therapist or a counselor or someone working closely with that child during their grieving process cannot make the grief process about them. There's a big difference, right, in awareness between a clinician who says, wow, that sounds like it was really hard for you. What happened next? And a clinician who says, oh, I don't know if we can keep talking about this. I'm feeling really sad. And so you can understand the difference there. Socially today, we know it's still difficult to speak about death openly. And yet, by age 16, the majority of children will have experienced the death of a loved one. Studies also confirm that adults who are unable to move through the tasks of grieving as children are also at significant risk for developing depression, anxiety, and serious psychological and social distress. Now, I think it's also important to recognize that if you are one of the adults who grew up in a culture around death that was taboo, and these things were not openly discussed, and maybe you didn't have a place to put these feelings, that those processes could take place now with a trusted therapist or a close friend or a significant other, someone who is able to validate and respect your feelings and experiences. Let's begin our discussion on children's grief and developmental stages. Instinctually, we want to protect children from painful experiences. However, children cope better when giving honest, age-appropriate information about death and the opportunity to participate in rituals and the opportunity to say goodbye. Awareness of how children and adolescents experience death is essential in helping them cope with their grief. The grieving process can be challenging because much of it is dependent upon developmental age and stage. So developmental age is a broad term we use to describe the level of understanding or comprehension at a particular age. It's important to remember that grief can provide an opportunity for emotional growth at any age. Allowing for children to recognize and experience feelings of grief encourages healthy emotional intelligence and increases their potential to gain support, as well as normalizes their experience. Let's start with infants and toddlers. Now this is up to approximately 3 years old. When someone significant in their life dies, babies are more acutely aware of the loss and separation, especially as they rely on primary caregivers and even older siblings for physical comfort and for their needs being met. They also react to the emotions and behaviors of significant adults in their environment. And so any disruption in their nurturing, their routine, their schedule, while they are also profoundly aware of the change, they do not have the sophisticated verbal skills to express their thoughts or feelings. Instead, their behavior may demonstrate the distress they are feeling. This may look like sleep disturbances, tantrums, or an exaggerated startle response. We have also seen regression in terms of bedwetting, thumb sucking, biting behaviors, and other milestones. Toddlers and very young children do not have the cognitive ability to understand an abstract concept like death. They function very much in the present. This concrete thinking can be present until around age 12 and also depends on the maturity level of the child. And so you can imagine the significance if their primary caregiver or parent is the one that has died. It does create disturbances to their typical routine. And so some of these behaviors and potential regressions are understandable in the concept of their day-to-day life. For this age group in particular, we are very much focusing on person and environment. Let's explore the age group of middle childhood. This is approximately 6 to 9 years old. All of these age stages and ranges are approximate. And so at this developmental stage, children can begin to have a more realistic understanding of death. They do begin to realize that when someone dies, they will not return. However, in the child's thinking, death may be limited to a certain age group, such as the elderly or individuals with disabilities. Children can experience death as terrifying and/or a punishment. They may personify death as a burglar, a ghost, a skeleton, a boogeyman, etc., or the idea of something that can randomly take people away from them. At this developmental stage, children can also become extremely concerned about their own safety and well-being. Depending on who in their life has died, they may become fearful or anxious as to who will care for them. Children at this age may fear for their own death because of the uncertainty of what happens after people die. And so a lot of reassurance can be very helpful for this age group, a lot of validation of feelings, and a lot of normalization around their own emotional experiences and expressions of what has happened. Let's move forward and begin to discuss later childhood. Now we begin talking about children that are approximately 10 to 12 years old. So we also can call this the pre-adolescent years. And so at this point, children are developing and expanding their understanding of what death is. This new awareness may involve a more comprehensive understanding of the nature of death in general, as universal, inevitable, and irreversible. Abstract thinking increases in this age group, and so they may begin to explore their own assignment of meaning around death. This age group may ask more questions about how a person died, what happens to the body, and they may seem to have a need for more graphic descriptions, and this may be comforting for them in a sense of understanding. Adults may perceive these questions as inappropriate and uncomfortable, but they simply reflect the developmental need to master the concept of death. Well, those of us in the bereavement field believe that open, honest communication and invitation to participate in family rituals such as wakes or funerals can be helpful for all children. Children in this age group particularly may be mature enough to be interested in planning funerals, may even ask to speak during services, or want to contribute to rituals in some way. Finally, let's talk about adolescents and teenagers. Now, this is approximately 13 to 18 years old. This age group is both more aware of their loss and more vulnerable. Those of us who have worked in the grief and bereavement world know that this age group is the most high risk. They may begin to integrate a spiritual approach, and they can conceptualize the abstract components of death. They may experience rejection of previous spiritual or religious beliefs. The reality of death can be overwhelming and shatter what they may have believed to be a safe or idealized world. Teenagers can feel overwhelmed by chaotic, confusing emotions and unexpected grief attacks, which we also know can be further aggravated by hormone fluctuations. They're going through a very difficult time already in their changing bodies, peer pressures, and other difficulties of this developmental stage. And so this is the reason that this age group can be at higher risk of emotional disturbances or red flags in the grief journey. It is also not unusual for this age group to deny the impact of their loss and avoid direct conversations about their loved one. Adolescence, as we know, is a period of growing independence when teens begin to separate and develop their own identities. Experiencing the death of a very close loved one can challenge their quest for autonomy. It's very important not to force children of any age group, but this age group in particular, to talk about their feelings around the death or how they're functioning through it. We are receptive when they want to share and understanding when they do not. Let's discuss some general guidelines to support children and caregivers after a loss. We want to use very basic language and keep the explanation simple. It's important to be honest and take the time to talk when children are ready to talk. We can encourage open communication and answer questions in a clear, honest, and straightforward manner. Remember that communication can be brief, but often that's one of the most meaningful interactions, especially for children. Often it's the adults who assign awkwardness to a topic, where children are naturally open to discussing these things and curious. Most importantly, we never want to force, coerce, or manipulate a child into talking about the death or loss of a loved one if they don't want to or they are not ready. We can take them at face value if they are offered communication or activities around death or loss and they say, no, thank you, or I don't want to. They're being honest about where they are at in their grief process. It can be helpful to discuss regressive behaviors with caregivers ahead of time and offer reassurance and comfort. In all likelihood, the majority of regressive behaviors are temporary. We want to allow for and expect mood swings with older adolescents and teens. It's also very helpful for caregivers, parents, and professionals to be aware that children thrive off of consistency and structure. And so after an immediate death of a parent or a caregiver or a sibling, it can be very helpful for a child when structure continues. And so, for example, if dinner time had been at 6 p.m. before the loss, dinner should still be at 6 p.m. after the loss, of course, to the best of the caregiver's ability. We want to encourage them to maintain the child's regular routine as much as possible. And when that's not possible, to give clear, understandable explanation as to why that's not possible. Physical affection for children can be helpful. Cuddling, hugs, and extra TLC when welcome, or as much as requested. Children benefit from choice regarding attending wakes, funerals, and other mourning rituals. It's important that the adults in their lives explain to them what they may see and what may happen. For example, people may be sad and they might cry, or your loved one may be in a casket and their body will be there, but they will not wake up and they will not talk. We can let them make the decision regarding their attendance to these things when appropriate. We can encourage a child to express their goodbyes by drawing a picture, writing a letter, or placing a personal memento with the deceased. And the child may choose to keep the memento if they want to after the services, or they may decide they'd like to do something more private and not so public. The most important piece of this generally is to give a child choice. Obviously, we know in the mental health field that the more choice a child has, the more empowered they feel. And the more empowered they feel, the safer they feel. And so this can be very helpful when working with grieving children. Let's move forward and discuss some case examples. These cases are directly from my time working with children as a bereavement specialist. And of course, all names and ages of the participants have been changed to protect the privacy of the participants. So here we have 3 case examples. We have Zed, who is age 7, Emma, age 5, and Mallory, who is age 14. Let's start with our 7-year-old. So Zed presented for one-on-one individual grief counseling after mom had died of a heroin overdose. I remember on the initial intake call, his aunt had expressed concern because he was not talking about or crying for his mom. And Zed and I worked together for about 6 weeks after the death of his mom. This was an acute loss. I worked with this child, I think it was about a week after the death of his mom. Let's talk about Emma's presentation. So Emma presented again for one-on-one grief counseling, and this was after her grandfather had died, following a long battle with cancer that ended with hospice at home. Mom had called the office for support because Emma was crying when she heard Grandpa's favorite Christmas song. And so this also tells you what time of year the death occurred. Okay. Emma and I worked together for about 4 months after the death of her grandfather. Let's talk about Mallory, and this is our 14-year-old. So this was the death of her father, and her father had died after a very rapid decline from brain cancer. He had been at a hospice inpatient unit, which means that he did not die at home, okay? So Mom had called for support for the entire family. Mallory also had 3 siblings that were adolescents, because she just wanted to give them the time and space to process and talk, was the initial concern reported. Mallory and I had worked together about 2 weeks after the death of her father. Let's discuss some themes and the resulting interventions of the case examples just provided. Let's go ahead and start with Zed, our 7-year-old. As you can likely imagine, Zed was reluctant to talk about his mom at first upon entering the therapy space. Okay, I had set up a variety of activities that day. For a 7-year-old in that age range, I wanted to provide a playful, fun environment with different opportunities for activities. So he had arrived at the appointment, and he had brought some of his own toys with him. He had monster trucks. And he walked into the therapy room and began to actually smash up the therapeutic activities that I had set up. I'm curious if anyone else recognizes what might be happening for him. So I had spoken with him and his aunt before offering for Zed to come and play just one-on-one with me. And his aunt was very open about, communicating that Mom had died and that she felt that it might be helpful for Zed to have someone to talk to about his mom dying. Okay, and so Zed agreed, of course, for his aunt to exit the therapy room and, just play with me. And so I remember offering Zed an activity. I'm pretty sure I had given him a choice at that point between some books that were out or coloring a picture, or I think I had Jenga set up, in fact. And he just wanted to play Smash Cars. And so I asked if I could play, and we set up things with the Smash Cars. In fact, he took his monster trucks and smashed down the Jenga set, and then took the Jenga pieces and made like fences and so forth, and began to just really get into this theme of, I'm going to run everything over with my monster trucks. And so, of course, developmentally, this makes complete sense. Zed wanted to play monster trucks. I am a stranger, and even though it was clear to him, right, that he was coming to talk to somebody about his feelings about his mom dying, this was what he wanted to do. And I, as a professional, know that that's developmentally appropriate. And so I went with it. I think we were about 20 to 25 minutes into the session playing cars when I asked him if there was anything that he wanted to talk about, and told him right? That I work with a lot of other kids whose moms or dads have died, and that he could say anything he wanted to me and ask any question that he wanted. And he said, "No, I just want to keep playing monster trucks." And I said, "Okay, let's play monster trucks." So I call this intervention being where they are at. Now, if we want to go a little deeper under the surface, could we assess that perhaps Zed is processing feelings of anger through play? We could. We could assess that. However, in this particular situation, his aunt didn't express any concerns. She didn't express any regression in terms of bedwetting or food intake. There were no real concerns expressed by the caregiver in his life. And so I really do call this intervention being where they are at, right? For younger children, they may be ready and willing to talk about the loss. They may not be. But if there's really no presenting immediate concern, building rapport and just making the offer to be there, to hear, listen, or talk with them, and normalizing words like death and loss are interventions in and of their own right. Let's move on to Emma. Now, Emma was a 5-year-old, okay, and she presented for one-on-one grief therapy after mom had called due to the death of her grandfather. And so now Emma actually entered the therapy room excited to talk about her grandpa. She really wanted to engage. I had set up a couple of different memory making activities for the holidays in this particular situation, and she was very, very interested in making a memory bracelet and telling me all about what Grandpa used to do during Christmas and, saying how much she missed him. And this was very obviously very different in contrast from our first case study with Zed, right? Similar age range, similar developmental stages, but very different. And so I label this intervention as whose grief are we concerned about, right? Because even though mom had called and reported, that Emma was crying and that Emma was talking about grandpa a lot, she presented in the therapy room very open, very willing, and without any extreme red flags, right? We are not talking about crying so hard that you are hyperventilating. We are not talking about not being able to go to school. We are not talking about extremes in this situation. And so I ultimately, after meeting with Emma, had a telephone conversation with mom about, whether or not she would like to talk to somebody, in terms of her own grief. Let's move on to our case study for Mallory, okay? And Mallory was the 14-year-old. I remember Mallory presented with her family, actually, for a family session with mom and her 2 other siblings. Mallory presented as very quiet, angry. She openly verbalized that she did not want to be there. She made a couple snide comments and remarks, and that she was only coming to talk because mom made her. She was pretty defensive. And so, as the professional, I did not push against that, of course. She is allowed to feel however she wanted to feel. I do remember the intake telephone call with mom being very much about, each one of your children is going to have their own grief process. And so I would encourage you to talk with each of them one on one about whether or not they are interested in attending this kind of grief support or activity. And so you can take into account how Mallory was feeling and how Mom was feeling. So I label this intervention Give Me a Break. And by that I mean that I don't know whether or not Mallory and Mom had a one-on-one conversation about Mallory wanting to attend the family grief support activity or not. I know how Mallory presented. And so, I, in the moment, had mentioned that not everybody needs to participate in the activity if they did not want to. And so I believe that Mallory really just sat in the family room with us and did not choose to participate in the activity. I believe I had presented memory making storytelling activity with prompt cards about what was your loved one's favorite thing to do, or your loved one's favorite shirt or story or color, just to initiate conversation for the family, which could allow them to process feelings together. I do believe at that point Mallory chose to sit that out, which was absolutely her choice and totally fine. Her siblings were also close in age, and so similar developmental stage, they did choose to participate. And so just in thinking about the intervention as a whole, it is interesting to see how siblings will have a different grief process within a family, and how we as the professionals have to be very mindful to not lump siblings together in what they may or may not be ready to talk about, or may not want to participate in. One of my very favorite quotes is from Mr. Fred Rogers, and says that play is often talked about as if it were a relief from serious learning. But for children, play is serious learning. Of course, we could apply this really across any framework with children. However, in the work that I have done with grieving children, I do find that this holds very, very true. The idea that a child would really engage in a very quiet room, sitting across from you as the professional, having a one-on-one conversation, may not be the way to get down on their level. I have found that play therapy is one of the most effective means of supporting a grieving child. And so as we move forward now into creative play and therapeutic interventions when working with grieving children, I did want to include this quote as I find it very powerful and impactful. So I have gone ahead and broken down therapeutic play and some interventions into some different categories here that may help us when working with grieving children to make sure that we're providing an appropriate intervention for where they are at. So obviously, when meeting with a child for the first time, your focus is going to be around helping them to feel comfortable, building rapport, increasing communication, and just providing a comfortable environment. And so icebreakers can be very helpful to attain those goals, right? So there is a therapeutic activity that can be designed with blank Jenga pieces. I call it getting to know you Jenga, right? Simple Sharpie markers, and you can go ahead and write questions on Jenga pieces. I like to use some general ones, as in, what is your favorite color? Or what is your favorite board game? And then in some of the other Jenga pieces, I may write a question such as, what was your loved one's favorite food? Or what was your loved one's favorite color? If they present as comfortable around talking about their loved one. If not, I may remove those pieces beforehand and just offer a generalized getting to know you activity. I'm sure we've all seen soccer balls or beach balls that have questions on them to toss back and forth. Anything that focuses on a child's favorite things, especially with younger children, we know that they tend to be egocentric and will really enjoy talking about themselves and their favorite things. So that can be a great way to really engage them. Simple card games such as Go Fish can be a great way to break the ice. Physical activities, Play-Doh, smush clay, those kinds of things, where you can really just engage in some kind of initiatory play with a child can be a great way to break the ice. If you have been working with a child for a little longer and perhaps they present as really wanting to talk about their loss or memorialize their loss, such as with our case example of Emma, you may present some memory making activities. So some of these may look like jewelry or bookmark beading. Remembrance luminaries can be a really fun activity. Of course, you're going to want to be conscious of developmental level and age range here, because there's a significant difference for, say, a 5-year-old and creating a glass or a plastic luminary, and a 14-year-old who may really want that authentic glass look and may, be able and have more gross motor skills to handle glass. We could look at picture frame decorations, memory boxes, planting flowers or trees. There are a lot of different memory making activities out there, and I would encourage you to do research on what activities are out there in terms of supporting a child's memory making. Now, a child may also present with a need to process big feelings around their loss, okay? And so for those children in particular, a therapeutic intervention may look like a letter to their special person, a drawing of their loved one, perhaps a feelings journal or a book. We can also use an empty chair technique in these situations. Of course, again, we want to be mindful of developmental age and stage, how much time we have in working with a child. We want to be careful not to open a process activity with a child that we cannot help them safely close. So, of course, there's a big difference between a 20-minute intervention opportunity and a 40-minute intervention opportunity. We're going to have to be very mindful of our assessment with children in where they are at in processing their loss. That being said, storytelling and an empty chair technique may be a great way for a child to say what they need to say, especially in the event that they did not get to say goodbye and or attend a wake, funeral, or other mourning ritual. There may be things that they need to say to their loved one and emotion that they need to express or process that we can help facilitate through these kinds of interventions. Now, of course, we want to be conscious of working with much younger children, that age range between 3 and 5, really. And so, some activities for those kiddos may look like using a toy phone to talk or act out what happened to their loved one. We may offer to act it out with dolls or puppets. This is really where that play therapy component comes in. In my therapy room, for example, I have a box of dolls, just a variety of different Barbies, male, female. Of course, we want to incorporate all different cultures, races, skin tones, but I do have that box, and I do find that younger children gravitate towards those because they really want an opportunity to either use the dolls to talk to their loved one or perhaps act out what happened around their death for me. I have had children use those kinds of materials to act out last days if their loved one was on hospice, or to act out their own feelings. Barbie is crying because Barbie is feeling sad. And this can also be a great way to initiate conversation with younger kids. Some other interventions with this age group might include coloring or painting of feelings. It can really be very powerful to ask a child what color their feeling is. Children often enjoy manipulatives, clay or Play-Doh for big emotions. When we are normalizing having emotions with a child, especially children who are grieving, and some of those emotions being very, very big, right? We want to allow opportunities for them to externalize those emotions. And so I also have what I call a punch pillow in my room. Sometimes we will make fists into clay. Or really, really manipulate that Play-Doh so we can feel our emotion kind of going into another object. Okay? And so these kinds of manipulatives or activities can be really helpful when working with younger children. We want to keep the focus on where they are at and what we can do to support where they are at with materials when possible. One of my favorite interventions across the board when working with children in general, but especially when working with children who are grieving, is books, because they are easily adaptable to developmental stage and age and offer a really great opportunity for normalizing of emotions and experiences. As you can see on this slide, I have included various books broken down really by age group. Okay, so there are quite a few examples for early childhood, school-age children, tweens, right? That 10 to 13 kind of age range, and then for teens. I would encourage you to take time to read these books yourself first before incorporating them into your practice or offering to read them with a child. Some of them, of course, are more powerful emotionally, and some of them lean more towards interventional activities. One of my favorite books that I use with children is called The Memory Box. I believe it is in that list. Yep, in the school age list. And it really talks about a child who is creating a memory box for a loved one. The first time I read that book, I had an emotional response to that book. Luckily, I was alone because I was pre-reading the book, and so I had the opportunity to feel my feelings. But you're going to want to expose yourself to these kinds of books and this particular intervention, as it can be a great tool for all ages and levels. As we are coming to the end of our training for today, let's take a few minutes and talk about red flags in the grieving process. Okay, and so this is when, for lack of better words, typical grief becomes more dangerous for children. In these particular situations, it is of the highest importance to seek intensive mental health treatment. We know as clinicians that early intervention is key, and so please do not ignore the following warning signs. So any ideation, plan, attempt, or rumination that the child desires to end their life. They are not looking for attention, and those statements or behaviors need immediate further evaluation. Symptoms that may indicate post-traumatic stress disorder in children can include re-experiencing hyperarousal, avoidance, a significant startle response, numbing or lack of emotions, significant regressive behaviors, and difficulty sleeping. Now, we want to be very careful in our assessment around these things as to not pathologize a child's grieving process. We also know that there is no timeline in terms of grief. Okay. We also know that these symptoms have specific diagnostic criteria around them and specific timelines in terms of those diagnostic criteria. So symptoms that may include anxiety in children are panic attacks, recurrent headaches or muscle aches. This may also include any reports of somatic symptoms, frequent and recurrent stomach aches being another symptom. Hoarding behaviors, extreme fears or worries related to being separated from their caregivers. Again, we are not talking about typical grief. We are talking about symptoms that begin to interfere with their daily functioning. Symptoms that may indicate depression in children include feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and worthlessness that do not lift over time. A depressed mood in children that can be expressed as feelings of sadness and emptiness, ongoing and persistent tearfulness, and ongoing or persistent irritability. So, similarly, symptoms of depression in adults, right, may present in children as an inability to please the adults in their lives. And so children, struggling with depression may say things like, I cannot do anything right at home, So the important piece around red flags and grieving children is that we want to take the time to further assess things that may indicate that their grieving process has become too overwhelming for them. Okay? If at any point ever in your career you are unsure as to a child's grieving process, as to whether or not we've crossed the line from typical and or for lack of better words, normal patterns of grieving, into an area that may be dangerous for children, please seek support. Please go to a supervisor, a trusted colleague, another clinician. Um, but definitely take the time to familiarize yourself with these specific red flags and what they may look like for children. Please feel free to further explore this topic on your own. This citation page can be a great place to start. Judy's House is a wonderful nonprofit organization that publishes yearly statistics around children in grief. And this may be a good opportunity to further your own research in this area. I want to thank everyone for your time and attention. I hope that this has been helpful in further developing your understanding of this topic. Please feel free to reach out. My email is listed here. I'm open to questions and comments. I really enjoy helping clinicians further their understanding and practice ideas for children and grief. And I thank you for taking the time today.
I hope you enjoyed this continuing education course from Agents of Change. Want to earn your CE credits for this course? Visit agentsofchangetraining.com or the link in the description to purchase the course and take the post-test. If you're looking for more CEs, check out our unlimited plan. You will get unlimited access to 150 plus ASWB and NBCC approved continuing education courses for one low annual fee. We're always adding new courses. Did I mention we also have 5 free CE credits available too? Check it out at agentsofchangetraining.com.